Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly and I'm a mixed media artist who specializes in ink work, gouache paint, and sometimes I do digital painting. I had some footage of this drawing I did for a little workshop I was putting together, and I thought it would be beneficial to anyone out there learning how to draw and how to shade using ballpoint ink. So the first thing I'm doing with my mechanical pencil, you can use a regular pencil, is I'm envisioning the perimeter of the subject matter almost like there are points around the shape of the subject matter, and I'm breaking it down into a super basic shape. I'm not getting into the details yet at all. I just want to make sure I am getting the proportions of the subject matter correct. This allows better accuracy so that there isn't a part of your painting or drawing that is going off somewhere else on your paper. Then I go further and I break down a little bit of smaller shapes. So in this case, each petal, I break down the smaller shapes within that larger shape. And that's basically how you start a drawing so that it still has accurate structural integrity. I am not trying to create details right now. That is the last thing you do. Right now, I want to make sure, is this a structurally sound object, right? Because you want it to have a sense of form. Same with the Black Widow spider. So you can see that overall shape I created where it's occupying space. This is especially helpful for figure drawings, or in this case a spider, to make sure that the limbs are in the right spots. So almost like each limb has a dot and there's like a outlined straight line to create a very obscure geometric shape, and that shows you like, okay, that's where that limb is, that's where that leg goes. And then within that shape, I break down the smaller shapes to create each leg. I did the same process with the smaller rose as well as the rosebud at the bottom. So even though this is just a drawing, it is a two-dimensional object, think of this process as a sculpture. So if you have a block of marble and you have to create a portrait bust sculpture, you're not going to start creating a very detailed eye when you have a block, right? Because what is it going to look like? It's going to look like there's some chiseled lines of an eye on a cube. It's not going to have dimension. Drawing's the same thing, it's just flat. So we're taking the larger shapes and breaking them down into smaller shapes. And then right here in this stage, this is when I actually start to use more free-flowing lines and not just those quick straight lines. Think of the beginning stage as cutting away the excess marble on the cube, and then once we have the overall shape and dimension of that sculpture, or in this case a drawing, then we can go in and smooth things out. Then we can create gradients and softer edges. Alright, so once I have a basic pencil drawing outline, I am going into the darkest areas first. That's where I like to start personally with my ballpoint ink drawings. I go exactly where the darkest dark values or shadows are going to be in the drawing. This, in my opinion, is easier because you can work your way from the darkest dark up to the lightest point being the paper, and then you just let the highlights just be the paper. It's very easy. If you start with the lightest values, it's totally fine to do it that way. I'm a person that tends to accidentally go a little bit too dark, so that's why I like to start with the darkest points in the drawing so I have more control over that. It's very easy because you use such light pressure in the lighter values. If I were to start there, it's very easy for me to accidentally make those areas too dark, and then it just flattens the whole image and the whole thing just ends up being way too dark, almost like you took a picture and the exposure is on really low and very dim looking, and it doesn't have a lot of dimension. So I like to start with the darkest darks first and work my way up to the highlights. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the lines I'm using to shade. So I like to go with the direction of the contours rather than just doing straight across lines. It's totally fine to do that. It's just a different look, honestly. I'm using the lines in the direction of the growth of the petals, so it gives this ripply effect and kind of aids in applying texture to the drawing. So my lines are going with the veins and like how they naturally grow on the petals. I'm kind of using that as a guide to make my lines, and it just kind of doubles as a textural component to my drawing. I also think it adds a lot more dimension to the whole piece when you go with the contours of the shape. So if you were to look at a sphere, for instance, and you're trying to shade it, rather than using straight cross-hatched lines, which you totally can, that's fine. It's just a different look. I like to go with the contours of it, so curved lines going with how the sphere would naturally protrude out. And this just makes it look smooth, and I think it gives more of a softer look to the whole thing, a little bit more dimension in that way. Again, it's just a stylistic choice. That is just what I'm doing. And when I am making these lines, I'm starting from the darkest darks, meaning I'm applying a lot more pressure in those areas to get more ink onto the page. And the line, as I'm flicking it out, I'm flicking it in the direction of the petal where it would be going, where that line would be going in the growth of the petal. Or if there is a natural ruffle or ripple in the petal, I'm just going with that shape. And as I'm flicking it out, what that does is it creates a line that tapers and feathers out. So it's going to start really dark, and then it's going to taper off and become a lot lighter, again giving more of that soft feathered soft gradient effect. And again, this is just what I'm doing with this petal, or rather this whole flower. If I were drawing something else, I might use a different type of shading shape. So oftentimes what I see, especially in ballpoint ink portraits, a lot of artists like to shade with little small tiny circles, especially for skin texture, and that gives a very smooth appearance. You don't see any lines because they're all tiny little circles. It's kind of like pointillism, so kind of like making a bunch of dots, but it's just gradual circles going up towards the lighter values from the darker values. Just different shapes create different texture. Keep that in mind while you're shading. What are you drawing? Are your lines going to describe the texture of that object really well? Just some things to think about as you're shading with ballpoint ink. Something that is very, very important when drawing with ballpoint ink is making it a habit to have some scrap paper on the side, because ink will ball up on the end of your pen. So ballpoint ink, it tends to be a lot more dry, and that's what allows you to get these really light values, like different controlled shading. Whereas if you have an inkier pen or a felt tip pen, that is very hard, because the ink that's put out, you don't have a whole lot of control over. It's just kind of ink comes out. And with inkier pens, it's more about using thinner lines to create a sense of value rather than the pressure. Well, the pressure aids in the thickness of the line weight, but you know what I mean. With ballpoint ink, the lighter you press, less ink comes out, and it's because the texture of it is a lot more dry. With that being said, one thing that can happen with ballpoint ink is that it can ball up at the tip of your pen, and sometimes what can happen is you get a bunch of that stuff just splotch all over your drawing, and that's why you see another piece of paper there with some lines on it. What I'm doing is, especially in areas that aren't as dark, as you can see in this petal I'm working on, I'm doing a lot lighter line work here, a lot less pressure on the pen to create a lot lighter of an area. Make it a habit to roll your pen almost like you have it on a diagonal on its side, and just roll it so that you get the excess ink off of the tip of your pen, because you don't want that, especially in a lighter area like where I'm working on right now. You don't want that splotching onto your artwork, and then it's like, great, I can't really hide that because I'm working in a lighter area. If it's in a really dark area, you can kind of disguise it and get away with it. I think that actually happened in a few areas in this piece, and that's fine, but gosh, it sucks when that happens in an area that's really light and that's just super noticeable. You just look at that ink splotch and you're like, man, I just wasted all my time. And then when you try fixing it with white ink, it turns blue and not white. So it's gosh, it is a struggle. So just make it a habit to clean off the tip of your pen, and I swear it will save you. It will save you. That scrap piece of paper is also really good at protecting the drawing from your hand. So our hands have a lot of natural oils on them, and sometimes that can smudge the ink. You don't want that happening. So definitely keep some printer paper nearby so you can protect your drawing as you work. Something else I really like to do, I like really dramatic lighting in my artwork, so I tend to push the values a lot, meaning that I really heighten the contrast. That is, again, just a stylistic choice from me that I like to implement in not just my drawings, but my paintings as well. I like the drama, okay? I love that. So that's cool. One thing I like to do when I'm working in ballpoint ink is go back around areas where there's a cast shadow. So you can see this big petal right there is casting a shadow on that petal right below it, the bigger ones. And something I like to do is go back in under there and kind of outline that edge. And is it the most realistic thing in the world to outline your work? No, but we learn the rules to break the rules, right? So I like to go back in and kind of outline that area where it's casting a shadow, and that just, it almost like brings your artwork from being good quality to like HD high quality level. It crisps up your work and just, I don't know, it sharpens the whole image, and that's something I like to do. Something that works really well is doing that same thing but with a separate pen. So I'll oftentimes do my whole drawing in ballpoint ink, and then I will use another pen like a micron or something felt tip or just inkier, not dry like this ballpoint Bic pen I have. I like to go back in and outline those areas in that pen because it lets out a lot more ink, thus making it darker, and then it just crisps it up. It makes it super sharpened. It sharpens the image. I really like that. So that's just something to think about. You don't have to, obviously, it's your life. Do what you want, but it's what I like to do to make an image just super HD looking and dramatic. And yeah, again, I like to really push the darkest darks as much as I can because I like that lighting. it's extra, okay? So, similar idea, but if we're talking about making the lighting really dramatic, something I really like to do is also really emphasize the core shadows. So I'm going to bring up that sphere diagram again. So there is a cast shadow, right? So we have a sphere, it is creating a shadow on the ground. That's a cast shadow, right? But then there is a shadow around the sphere, and this is what we call a core shadow generally. And what this is the shadow around an object that is its like darker area. You'll notice on the end of the sphere on the other side there's some light that bounces back. So oftentimes what you'll see, depending on the surface and material, but generally speaking, an object that is shaded, light tends to bounce everywhere, and you'll get a little bit of that lighter value bouncing back on the underside of your object. The core shadow is the darkest part that is just behind that, so it's going to be around the core of your object. So this creates that sense of roundness in your subject matter. I like to really emphasize this again for dramatic effect, and you'll see that in this petal, the larger one right here. There's a really massive core shadow there, and there's some light bouncing back from that petal that's underneath it. And I like to just really enhance that, not just by making the core shadow darker, because that can end up making everything just dark, right? But something that can really enhance that is to make not just the core shadow, you know, obviously darker, but you can make the light reflecting back on it, that underside reflection, a little bit lighter. So that creates contrast, which makes the core shadow look darker without actually making it darker, right? Because you don't want it as dark as, you know, the darkest dark throughout the whole thing. Again, that'll flatten it. So just creating this contrast right there will trick your eye into thinking that it's darker than it really is, because that light that's right next to it is suggesting that it is darker. Alright, so that's really all I have of this footage. I don't know what happened to the rest of it, but I hope that at least explaining part of this drawing can help you better understand like how to start the drawing and then how I shade using ballpoint ink. If you guys would like to see more videos like this, please let me know by either commenting something or giving this a thumbs up. I can definitely do more drawing videos. I've been doing a lot of painting videos, so if you want to see more how-tos on drawing in general, I can totally do that. I also have some footage of human anatomy drawings and things like that. I can help you guys with that as well. Anyways, I will see you next week. Bye!